If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. Hello everyone, hope you're all having a great day. I was gonna say, I found recently that by goal setting, I can make a massive difference to how I feel, and it really helps me feel good in myself. Whereas otherwise, I kind of feel that I'm stuck in a limbo, and that's when I feel bad. So just advice to anyone out there, if you're feeling down or anything, make sure you have some goals, or at least set some if you don't already have any. And also, I love doing wood stories. I wanted to know, what's the most scary thing anyone's ever found in the woods before? I've never really found anything scary in the woods before, except for a bag that looked like it was floating in the dark. But that was my fault for being an idiot and not checking what it was first. But anyway, now to the stories. Earlier this year, I went camping. I chose to head to a campground that I often use. It's not far from where I live. Now, since I've had kids, I like to stay reasonably close to them in case anything happens, and also because it's almost empty all the time. I invited a few friends who are supposed to meet up with me for the next couple of days. I arrive at the campground, put $4 in the honor system box and drove to my usual site. I was pleased I had the place to myself. I first walk over to the pit toilets to make sure they had TP, which they did, and then spent about 5 minutes looking at some of the rock formations near the entrance to the site. When I came back, the parking permit that showed I paid for my campsite was gone from under my windscreen wiper and laid in the grill. I think it's strange, but figured it as the wind. After all, I haven't seen any other signs of human life here. I leave the campsite and hike about a mile into the small lake, where swimming and fishing is allowed. I put a line in the water and walked over to the beach. I started to get the feeling that someone's watching me, but wrote it off as paranoia. That was until somebody began throwing rocks at me near the lake. I couldn't see them. Every minute or so, someone would throw one though, making a large splash near me, but there were no giggles or screams like you'd expect. I realised it was most likely one of my friends who I knew, wanting to have some fun with me. It's something we often did, messing around with each other. I immediately hiked back to my van. It was unlocked and would definitely have been too tempting for people not to tamper with. Now, I expected everything to be gone or tampered with, but everything's in order. I assumed I had startled whoever opened it up before they could get any of my gear. I locked my van and went back to the lake with my fishing pole. The entire time, I'm aware someone's following me, but I never found them. This let me narrow down my list of suspects to 3 or 4 friends who had the necessary skill to sneak up on me in the woods. I grabbed my pole, heading back, no longer aware of being followed. I assumed my friend got tired of playing with me and would have a surprise for me at the campsite. I was right. Somebody had drawn a smiley face in the dust where I was going to put up my tent. It's both lame, but somehow chilling. I went ahead and set up my tent and got everything ready for the night. At the appropriate time, 11 I'd guess, I announced, right, I'm off to bed, see you tomorrow, so whoever's within an earshot would hear. I bunked down, but I don't fall to sleep. Now sometime later, I hear someone approaching my site. I even thought to myself that whoever this was needed to work on their stealthy approaches. I hear them shuffling around with my things. I hear they're at the picnic table. They must have been hungry. But I couldn't see anyone because I put up a fly net and it stops the rain too, so it's virtually impossible to see out of. I then heard something being poured and thought to myself, God, they're ruining my coffee. Then I saw a flash and realised that my visitor had used some of the stove fuel to light a campfire. Seemed pretty friendly if they're intruders. Since we're under a burned barn at the time, I knew it had to be my friend who works for the National Forest. No one else knew how to do it. We might be idiots to each other, but we're always law-abiding. I sat up in my tent and said, in the most threatening voice I can muster, I love you like a brother, but when I get out of this tent, you don't have a cooler full of beer with you. I'm gonna bury this hatchet in your face. There was no answer, just silence, and I continued, yeah, there might be some remorse, but it'll be over when you hit the ground. With that, I opened my tent and glared at the figure at the camp chair across the fire. I was expecting to see my buddy. Instead, I see a thin, pale blonde woman. I choke out, what? Just as she shot up then, she darts into the woods. I did what I believed is references noping out of there. I broke camp and drove 20 miles away to a different site. It's weird, but the fact that it's a young woman somehow scared me, not a guy. She could have easily shot me if she is armed, or chosen to. The next day I told my friends, and they were more terrified than I was. I was living in California and had a hobby of backpacking in the Sespe wilderness. I liked the adventure, I suppose. There is everything out there from bear to Mexican cartel drug grows, but I wasn't ready for what I found. The wilderness is huge, over 200,000 acres. You could walk for days and never see anyone. On this trip, I was going out for 3 days. I'm a young man, mid-20s, and I was going with a lifelong friend, Tom, who's in his 40s. I've known him all my life. So one sunny Friday afternoon, we meet up after work and hit the trail. The trip was going well, until the second day had come. Camp is set up and we're hiking along a creek after breakfast. Creeks are nice for hiking because they let you get off the beaten trail, but it's hard to get lost. Anyway, Tom and I are hiking along the creek when we saw a cabin. Not a log cabin, but an almost large shed. Being that we're on public land, we knew it had to be one of the very few forest ranger outposts. When we approach a cabin, we announce ourselves but don't get a reply. We then see a large water reservoir next to the cabin, so we get some water and knock on the door. We walk 2 steps, stand on the small porch and knock on the door. The door swung in when Tom knocked. There was no one home. It was obvious that a ranger did not live here. There's a kitchen area. No one home. There's a Nazi flag. And a desk and book. We went in and everything was very clean, but worn. We look around. Tom walked over to a closet near the bed while I snooped through the desk. There were some white power books, Arcanist cookbook, and some other things on the shelves. On the desk I found the most interesting thing of all. It was a double-edged axe head. Engraved on it was, I was there and not you, and the date is 1983. I show the axe head to Tom and ask him what's in the closet, and he said nothing but combat figures, a Ziploc bag full of blonde hair. At that time, we knew we had to leave. I turned to the door and held the axe in my hand. I wondered what it meant. I think it's weird too because I have blonde hair. Now, I put it back on the desk. I see what appears to be blood in the corner. It's old dried blood, but definitely blood. Now after camping, we go and make some food. That night, we traded man stories and I climb into my sleeping bag. It's a beautiful night under the stars. In the morning, I wake up. I can feel a weight on my chest. I look down and see a stack of things on my chest. It was my wallet, my ID, and some writing that said, 83, you better run. Needless to say, we got out of there and never come back again. This encounter happened when I was about 12 or 13. And with my best friend who was 3 years younger than me. The town we grew up in was incredibly safe, and it was very unusual for us to ever feel unsafe for the most part. The two of us often hung out in the local park down the street from our home. The park is quite large and open and backed onto an overgrown field and a small little wilderness type area. On this particular day, we were hanging out on top of a giant metal slide which had a great view of the whole park and the field that lied at the back of it. We're sitting there chatting away, and I noticed something in blue along the tree line between the field and wilderness. I notice it move closer and figure it's someone walking a dog or something in the field. The figure just stands there for a while, not moving, just standing perfectly still. I start getting a little creeped out and point out the person to my friend. She starts yelling at the person, "Hey, Smurf man, we aren't afraid of you," because she's an idiot. Suddenly the figure starts moving towards us, getting closer, moving quite fast now. We freak out and hightail it home as fast as we can. That afternoon, I'm out delivering my newspapers and I walk past the park and can still see a blue figure now in the park, but still far back. It seems like we're being followed. The next day, as I'm preparing my newspapers, I read one article and see someone escaped from prison and attempted to abduct a young girl. He's then described as wearing a blue windbreaker, blue cap, and blue jeans, considered dangerous. A shiver now ran through my entire body because I know that's who was stalking us. I told my mum and she thought I was nuts because the guy had escaped from prison a few towns over, and it seems impossible for him to have travelled that far. She called the police to give the tip anyway. They also seemed skeptical that he'd be out of town. However, a few days later, he's apprehended in a different park in our town trying to abduct another girl. It is by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. I still get awful vibes when I stand in parks on my own. This happened to me over 30 years ago, but I still remember the feeling of fear as though it were yesterday. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We are allowed to take a backpack, empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, clothes, extra stocks, Hellzone tablets, small cooking pot and spoon. No forks. We're not allowed to bring food or water since part of our training is identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike to find a spot to set up camp. First I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later. Now I'm loving life, just me and nature. I had no fears. Even as night began to fall, I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire, had a great feeling of peace. I slept well, but woke up thirsty. My search for water began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, place the tablets in and boil it. And it had a crappy taste, but at least I'm hydrated now. All went well. I have a great time until my last day. It was early in the afternoon. I clear up my camp, hiking out to my drop-off location. As I sat there, leant up against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that it had to be my pickup. Now as I'm waiting, a vehicle that I've never seen before pulls up in front of me. Immediately I realise that I do not know the man driving. He gives me an odd look. My gut tells me it's bad news. He says, "Hey, what are you doing there? And am I alone?" I then said, "Well, my friends are breaking camp behind me." He then gave me a wink, got into his vehicle and rode off. He then stopped, looked as though he's gonna come around. I didn't bother looking back. I was terrified. I knew I had to hide. I can hear his engine start. I ran into the woods and hid. As I ran, I hear him come past where I was originally standing. I stay quiet and remain hidden. I can hear him calling out to me walking through the brush. I'm so afraid. He says I'm gonna regret this and that he's coming back with more. I hear the car door slam, the engine start and him pull away. Going back to my drop-off point is now not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I see a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what happened to me. He told me I'd done the right thing because a young girl had been brutally attacked the night before, and the police and forest service had been searching the area. Luckily he drove me to the base camp where I learnt that another girl in my class had another encounter with that guy, but also ran away. If there's anything to be learned from this, it's sure to always trust your gut and never camp alone. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather turns worse. It's cold and grey, unheard of for Kansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm, stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot that we knew about. It's barely accessible by a 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. We aimed to be very far away from civilization, which was only made up by a single spotlight and a couple of hundred people that drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it starts to rain. By the time we find camp, it turns to hell. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road with a few hundred feet of log-in roads and rotting carcasses. That night, we pass a bottle round, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we're too drunk. Eventually we do, and manage to start a fire with diesel. At this point the howl had stopped, and the empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empty growing. We drank, played cards, and passed out in our tents. The next morning I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out, and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman is driving, a man's beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out of the window away from us the whole time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminates part of them, and you can see their 1,000-mile stares. It's really weird. I don't like it. It's a look of crushing poverty that you've only seen in pictures existing in war-torn countries. The projects in inner cities and deep south. They then start talking to us. You all come from the city to do some camping. Well, that's fine as long as you ain't doing no drugs. You ain't doing drugs, are ya? Now we aren't. They say just drinking then, hell, I like a drink now and then my darn self. That's fine, that's just... You want to know something about here. Have you seen them black helicopters flying around? Then some boys at work for me. This is my land, and they told me that you can't be too careful, so I figured I'd check it out. She then begins laughing. She then says, "You'll know Bethany?" We don't. Everyone knows her, you'll go church. I lie and say yes. She says, "Good, I ain't got no time for those that don't fear God. Why don't you come to the church tomorrow? It's in the basement, you can meet Bethany. It's just over there up the hill, you can't miss it." Boy, sure she'd like to meet you all. They all would. We assure her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all look at each other and start laughing. Very nervously. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized, but every once in a while, you know when something's wrong. I mean, everything about this situation's just wrong, and we're miles away from help. I mean, heck, this is the only person we've seen out here, and we definitely don't want to go into the basement for whatever lied there for us. We decide right then and there to pack up and leave and never come back again.